So the topic we're going to talk about today is called central place theory, which as we enter the urban geography unit is going to be useful in the first of many models that sort of talk about the size and the layout of cities and sort of why they look the way they do. And it's also going to really help us in terms of thinking about different types of services and where they would fall within cities or in which kind of size of cities we might see various services. So there's a lot of different things to kind of take away from central place theory. So where we start is by looking at the term settlement. So a settlement is a permanent collection of buildings where people reside, work, and obtain services. So what we're going to be looking at in central place theory is how the size of different settlements affects what type of services they're gonna have in it. And not surprisingly, smaller settlements are going to have lower level services, and larger settlements are going to have kind of larger services. And we'll talk about what that looks like and kind of use some specific terms. But in here, kind of on the side, you can see kind of the different sizes of settlements. We have hamlets, which are kind of sub city level and very small. So the example that I would give is kind of Burton at the bottom of Vashon Island. The town itself would be Vashon, and then a city would be more something like Seattle or Tacoma. So the point of central place theory, like we said, is discussing how the different size of settlements are geographically related and also kind of the different types of services that we would expect to find in each of these levels of settlement. So we'll jump right into it. So some important vocabulary to look at. We are going to use the term range, threshold, and then market area, which there's a lot of synonyms for market area. So I'll mention all of those when we get to it. But the term range means the geographic distance people are willing to travel to go to a place or obtain a service. So the point of this and how it will connect into services is that there are some services that have a large range. So for example, an airport. And there are some services that are going to have a much, much smaller range. So let's say a gas station or a corner store or something like that, or a fast food restaurant. So range is the geographic distance people are willing to travel to go to a place. Threshold is pretty well connected and is the minimum number of people it takes to support a service. And again, you're going to have things that have large thresholds. Say a professional sports team usually has a specific amount of people in the millions that it takes to support a professional sports team, as opposed to something that a really small threshold. So something like a bank, which would have a much, much smaller threshold, small number of people it takes to support a service. So the point of this is thinking about how services kind of are connected to different market areas. So these are geographic areas that we would associate with a service. And sometimes you also see this called functional region, as we talked about in the first unit. Sometimes you'll hear the term nodal region. And then sometimes you'll also hear the term hinterland. So lots of fun synonyms for market area. But we will stick to market area for this one. All right, so the famous hexagons for central place theory are here. And you can see the layout and the distribution of all the different sizes of hexagons. We got our trippy looking diagram with lots of nested hexagonal settlements. And so the point of this is we have the big circle in the middle represents kind of the largest level of settlement. So your city would be in the middle. And the 6 that we see around in our hexagon would maybe represent towns. And then the smaller hamlets would be these dots that we see in the smallest kind of variation of hexagon. And the interconnectedness represents sort of the relationship between smaller towns and kind of a bigger settlement or bigger city. And all the hexagon itself represents what we would consider to be the market area. So again, for somebody living in one of these small hamlets, there might be a couple restaurants, a bank, a gas station. They might consume all of those services locally, right? And then if they want to go up the ladder, they might go to a mall or a grocery store or something in a higher order central place. And then if they want to obtain more specialized services or services that have a higher range or a higher threshold, they would have to go to the city, to the highest order central place in order to find that. So services that have higher range and higher thresholds oftentimes are going to be found in cities, and services with lower ranges and thresholds will be found kind of throughout, but are more likely to be found kind of in lower order places. And we use hexagons. We use hexagons to represent this. So they fit right in pretty well with each other. So that's one of the big reasons we use them. So let's talk about some of the other kind of assumptions to this model. So this is a model like many of the other models in AP Human Geography that are basically considered to be an isotropic plane, meaning that they are a flat, featureless landscape on an infinite plane. So this is, so obviously we have lots and lots of things that would skew where people live, but it is really interesting when you look at a map. You'll see a lot of central place theory on maps, right? You'll see the kind of the relationship between different sizes of towns and how they relate to sort of a higher order town, city. But this assumes kind of the uniformity that we saw in von Thunen's model, that we see in Weber's model, and that some of the other models that we'll look at in the urban geography unit have later. So the isotropic plane. So this also has some assumptions around the sort of behavior of consumers. That they're going to shop at the closest place possible, right? You're going to go to the McDonald's down the street, that instead of maybe the McDonald's a couple miles away that has the good nuggets. I don't know. I think all the nuggets are probably the same. Yeah, and that consumers aren't going to go beyond the range of a good or exceed the threshold of a good. So that consumers aren't going to go beyond the range of a good, and that market areas are not going to have like higher order threshold things that they can't support, right? So that's maybe why we see professional sports teams move sometimes, or why we see businesses that are more specialized within cities close, because that number might change. And then again, we use hexagons. Hexagons are used because they are efficient in terms of not having overlapping or spaces that are left out. And then we can also, within this kind of system of nested hexagons, see the relationship between higher and lower order settlements, which is useful. In ways that circles, obviously not. So again, we have central place theory in action on a flat, featureless plane. I don't know. It says example northern Germany, but I don't know if northern Germany is entirely flat and featureless. I would guess not. And then we see how this might actually look in action. And right, the things that actually would skew kind of the way this looks probably is a big old interstate that probably runs right up here through Denver, and also some of these settlements in and around Denver. But within it, we can see what we're looking at in terms of the different relationships between cities, right? Denver is our highest order city. Then we have sort of the mid-range cities, places like Boulder, Colorado Springs. And then, you might get smaller. Fort Collins is a little bit smaller than that. So you have kind of the relationship of the different sizes, right? And over here in the mountains, we don't have a whole lot of anything. So you can see the way that kind of the features might skew or might make this look different in the ways that they frequently do within these models. But it's still useful to think about the relationship between the different sizes of settlements and the different types of services that are going to go in each. And just thinking about how, we got all our professional sports teams. We got maybe, the Denver Broncos and the Nuggets and the Rockies in Denver. We got big museums and all sorts of fun stuff in Denver. Going lower on the settlement list, we have places like Fort Collins and Boulder that I'm sure have malls and lots and lots and lots of stuff to do. And then if you went to a smaller town with a few thousand people, you might find a much lower, threshold for services and a much lower range that people are willing to travel to get groceries, right? So that's why you still have some sort of services in smaller towns. All right, and we see a little bit of how this works in and around the Seattle area. So just looking at our Google Maps, we have Seattle, which is our central place, kind of in and around this region, but also a lot of kind of secondary towns that are, Kirkland and Redmond and Bellevue and Tacoma and Renton, that you can see. And Google Maps uses the different font sizes to kind of differentiate between the size of places. And then within this, we have smaller places that you may or may not have heard of, like Carnation and Sammamish and other places. But we kind of can see the relationship between the different sizes of settlements here too. All right, so we will talk a lot in class about how the sizes of settlements relate to the types of things that are in them. But for now, we're going to leave it here. Bye.